Cat Mummies. Chapter 1. From Totems to Gods. In the summer of 1888, an Egyptian farmer was working in the desert near the town of Beni Hassan. One day he dug a hole and he accidentally made an incredible discovery. Just under the surface of the desert lay thousands and thousands of cat mummies. They had been lying there undisturbed for more than 2,000 years. Why did the Egyptians mummify so many cats? Animals were a big part of religion in Egypt from prehistoric times. Thousands of years before the pyramids were built, before Egypt became one country, the people were divided into clans. Each clan had a sacred symbol or totem. The totem was usually an animal. As a rule, clan members did not kill or eat their totem animal. Why were certain animals chosen to be totems? Perhaps the clan members chose an animal because it helped them survive. For example, ibises ate poisonous snakes. Perhaps the clan admired a certain quality in an animal, such as the strength of a bull, or perhaps they were afraid of a particular animal and thought it might not harm them if they worshipped it. When war broke out between clans, the winning clan demanded respect for its totem. First, one clan rose to power, then another, and eventually a nation was built. Many totems were held sacred. All along the Nile, people revered cats, ibises, hawks, beetles, and other animals. When the ancient Egyptians began to believe in gods, these gods were not just spirits. The Egyptians believed the gods must have bodies to live in. Sometimes the gods chose to live in the bodies of sacred animals. A particular god would choose a particular animal because they shared some of the same characteristics. For example, Anubis, the god of the tombs, lived in a jackal's body because jackals often prowled around tombs. At first, a single animal was chosen to be the body where the god could live. This animal lived in luxury in the temple of its god. Priests fed and cared for the temple animals. Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian who lived in the 1st century BC, reported that the temple cats in Ichneumons, the Greek name for African mongoose, were fed pieces of bread mixed with milk and pieces of raw fish from the Nile. Those who had the privilege of feeding the animals wore special emblems, and the people they met bowed to them in respect. Diodorus also wrote how the caretakers collected money to use for the animals' food. If an Egyptian had a child who lived through a serious illness, he made a vow to the gods. To fulfill the vow, the Egyptian shaved his head and weighed his hair. Then he donated an amount of gold or silver equal to the weight of his hair. The temple animals were thought to be vessels of the gods. As such, they were treated with care and respect, but the animals themselves were not actually worshipped as gods. Eventually, some people began to confuse the sacred animals with gods themselves. The cat or the crocodile in the temple was no longer just a vessel for a god. It was an actual god, and so was every other cat or crocodile. Animal worship was especially popular in the late period, from 712 to 332 BC and beyond. The people treated sacred animals with fanatic devotion. Diodorus reported that anyone caught killing a sacred animal was put to death. It didn't matter whether the animal was killed on accident or on purpose. If anyone happened to find a dead animal, he backed away from it in horror, mourning its death and declaring his own innocence at the same time. Around 60 BC, Diodorus just saw how fanatical the Egyptians could be about their sacred animals. He saw a Roman soldier accidentally kill a cat. At that time, the Roman Empire was the most powerful empire ever. The Egyptians had every reason to be afraid of the Romans, but that didn't stop a mob from gathering at the soldier's house. The pharaoh Ptolemy the 12th sent officials to plead for calm, but the mob's devotion to cats was overwhelming. They killed the Roman. There's the mob. There's the Roman. And there's the body of the dead cat that was killed on accident. Chapter 2. Cat Worship. The ancient Egyptians held cats sacred from the earliest times. Cats protected the food in the houses and granaries from rats and mice. They also killed asps and other poisonous snakes. Cats played many roles in Egyptian mythology. In one story, a cat saved the world from the darkness and evil. The ancient story Egyptians believed that when the sun set, a battle was fought between Ra, the sun god, and Ep, the serpent of darkness. Every night, Ra turned into a cat and fought the evil Apep, and every night he chopped off the serpent's head. Then in the morning the victorious sun could rise in the east. But Apep was immortal, so every night he came back to life to fight the sun god again. So here's a picture of the cat, which is Ra, and then here's a picture of Apep, the snake, who's nighttime and daytime, so they battle all night long, and then finally the cat wins, making it morning time. One member of the cat family, the lion, was the sacred animal of two Egyptian goddesses, Sekhmet and Bastet. Each goddess was portrayed with a woman's body and a lion's head, but the goddesses were exactly the opposite. Sekhmet was violent and angry. She was the goddess of war and diseases. She stood for the destructive burning power of the sun. Bastet was kind. She was the bringer of good fortune and good health. She stood for the good power of the sun, the power to make things grow. The destructive Sekhmet continued to have a lion's head, but eventually the gentle Bastet's lion turned into a cat. More and more often, Bastet was pictured with a woman's body and a cat's head, and the cat became her sacred animal. One legend said that Bastet was once stung by a scorpion and was saved by the sun god Ra. If an Egyptian was stung by a scorpion, he would reenact the event in Bastet's life. First he cried out as Bastet had, "O Ra, come to thy daughter, whom a scorpion has bitten on a lonely road." Then he answered in Ra's words, do not fear, my splendid daughter. Behold, I stand behind thee. It is I who will destroy the poison that is in the limbs of this cat." By putting himself in Bastet's place and reciting the spell, the Egyptians believed that they'd be saved by Ra, just as Bastet had been. The main temple of Bastet was in the city of Bubastis. When Shishonk I became pharaoh around 945 BC, he built Bubastis into an important city. The cult of Bastet had become popular all over Egypt. This was the time when the cat worship began to rise to a fanatical level. Artisans made thousands of small bronze sculptures of cats. They sold them to people who worshipped Bastet. These worshippers offered the bronze cats at temples and shrines and hoped for an answer to their prayers. Cat amulets had become popular with young married women. A woman would buy an amulet, or a magical charm, showing a cat and her kittens and hang it on the wall. Then she prayed to Bastet for the same number of children as the number of kittens on the amulet. Herodotus, a Greek historian who lived from about 484 to 425 BC, traveled all over Egypt. He wrote that when a fire broke out, the Egyptians did not show any concern for the property being burned. Instead, they protected cats. Men stood around the fire to make sure no cats ran into the burning building. If a cat perished in the fire, the Egyptians deeply mourned its death. If a cat died a natural death in a house, Herodotus reported, all those who lived in the house mourned the loss by shaving off their eyebrows. The reverence an ancient Egyptian felt towards a cat did not end when the cat died. It was important to bury a sacred cat with the respect it deserved, and that respect included mummification. According to Chapter 3, a second chance at life. According to the legend, when the god Osiris reigned over the earth with his wife, the goddess Isis, he civilized the Egyptians. He gave them laws. He taught them how to plant and harvest crops. He was a kind and well-loved ruler. His brother Set was jealous. He wanted the crown for himself. Set conspired with 72 men to kill Osiris. First, he secretly measured Osiris. Next, he built a beautiful wooden chest, just the right size for his brother. Then he invited Osiris to a feast. At the feast, Set promised to give the chest to whomever it fit exactly. Each of the 72 conspirators tried to lie in it, but not one of them fit exactly. Osiris was the last to try. As soon as he lay in the chest, the men slammed the lid and they nailed it shut, and they threw the chest into the river. So here's a picture. Isis searched for the chest and found it near the mouth of the river. She tried to hide it, but Set found it. He cut up Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scattered them all over Egypt. Isis searched for the pieces of Osiris's body. With the help of the other gods, she put the pieces together, embalmed the body, and wrapped it in linen. Then she fanned the body with her wings, and Osiris became alive again. From that time on, he was the god of the dead. Osiris died, but he came back to life. The ancient Egyptians thought perhaps people can do that too. After all, Osiris has died against his will, and people die against their will. Osiris got a second chance at life, so the Egyptians prepared their dead for a second chance of life. The ancient Egyptians believed that within a living person was a special life force, they called it Ka. As long as a person was alive, his Ka stayed within his body. When he died, his Ka left him. The Egyptians believed that the Ka would come back to the body and give it new life, just as Osiris had been given new life. But first, the Ka needed to find the body it belonged to. If the body was decayed, the Ka couldn't recognize it, so the Egyptians learned to preserve the body with mummification. Embalmers treated the body with salt and wrapped it in linen. This stopped the body from decaying. If the body didn't decay, then it could still be recognized, and its Ka could find it again. A statue of the dead person, called a Ka statue, might be entombed with a mummy. Then the Ka could live in the statue if the mummy was destroyed. Cats were treated much in the same way. A cat had its Ka too. Its body had to be preserved so that its Ka could find it again some day. Then the cat could come back to life. Sometimes a cat was mummified in an elaborate way. The body was wrapped into strips of linen that had been dyed into 2 colors. The linen strips were woven together to form beautiful patterns. The head was covered with a mask made of materials similar to paper mache. Pieces of linen were sewn in the mask to look like eyes. Ears were made from the midribs of palm leaves, set in a natural position. Other cats were mummified in a simple way. They were rolled up only in a piece of plain linen, but the rolling was done with the care and respect that a sacred animal deserved. Many cat mummies were buried in coffins. These were made of bronze or wood. Some coffins were shaped like cats. Others had rectangular boxes. Sometimes bronze Ka statues were mounted on top of the boxes. Sometimes the boxes had a cat face painted on top. Their eyes might be made of crystal or gold, with black obsidian pupils. Cat mummies were buried in cemeteries especially created for cats. There were cat cemeteries at the Beni Hassan, Thebes, and other towns where Bastet was worshipped, but the most famous cat cemetery was the city in which Bastet was especially revered, Bubastis in the Nile Delta. Here's a whole bunch of cat mummies. It's a whole room full of them. There's their temple, the Egyptians' temple. Chapter 4. Bubastis. The city of Bubastis was the center of cat worship in ancient Egypt. It was founded in prehistoric times, perhaps by the clan whose totem was the cat. Tel Basta, near the modern town of Zagazig, is the site of the ruins of ancient Bubastis. Herodotus thought that Bastet's temple in Bubastis was the most beautiful temple in Egypt. It sat on an island with only its entrance connected to land by a narrow passage. Around the island flowed water from the Nile in channels 100 feet wide. While the rest of the city had been raised up by embankment over many years, the temple was left alone, so an Egyptian walking around Bubastis could look down on the temple from anywhere in the city. The temple was made of stone. It was square with a low wall built around it. Tall trees surrounded the temple's shrine. In the center of the shrine stood a statue of Bastet. Sacred cats were kept near the statue of their goddess. The building of the temple, which began in the 4th dynasty, which began around 2600 BC, this was also when the Great Pyramids were built. Edouard Neville, the Swiss Egyptologist who excavated the temple in 1891, found in the temple the names of Cheops and Chephren, the pharaohs from whom the 2 largest pyramids at Giza were built. Amenemhet, a pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, which began around 2000 BC, left his name on the temple too. His inscription read, "He erected his statue to his mother Bastet." But in spite of this inscription, Bastet was not yet the most important goddess in the city. She became the most important in the 22nd dynasty, which began around 945 BC, when Shishonk I made Bubastis a major city. His son, Asorkon II, started to reconstruct the temple, which had been ruined over the centuries. Orishkon III finished the temple and dedicated it to Bastet. This was the temple that Herodotus saw. Bubastis was also the home of a huge cemetery for cats. Because the cat goddess Bastet became the most important deity in Bubastis in the 22nd dynasty, that was probably the reason why the cat cemetery was created too. Herodotus reported that when cats died anywhere in Egypt, they were taken to Bubastis, mummified, and buried in the cat cemetery. However, Naville's excavation showed him that Herodotus might have been wrong. Naville found cat bones piled up in large underground pits. The walls and the floors of the pits were made of bricks or hardened clay. A furnace had been built near each pit. The furnace bricks were blackened from fire. The bones in the pits were mixed with ashes and charcoal. All this evidence suggested to Naville that in Bubastis cats were cremated. Naville found no evidence that cats were mummified there, but mummification and burial was the rule at other cat cemeteries, such as the one at Beni Hassan. Some Egyptologists believe that cat cremation was unlikely because the Egyptians believed so strongly in preserving the body after death. Perhaps the cat bones were burned by accidental fires or acts of vandalism. Whatever the cause, many cats met this fate. In just one of the pits in the cemetery, Naville found over 720 cubic feet of cat bones. If a room filled with cat bones is 2 feet long and 10 feet wide, the bones would have to be piled up 6 feet high to equal the number of bones in that one cemetery pit. Imagine how many cats it would take to fill that space. Herodotus also witnessed the festival held each year in honor of Bastet. He wrote that it was one of the most popular festivals in Egypt, attended by 700,000 men and women, plus many children. They sailed down the Nile from all parts of Egypt. The atmosphere on these boats was like a carnival. Some of the men played pipes, while some of the women played castanets. The others sang and clapped their hands. When they came to a town along the banks, some of the women left their boats and went ashore to dance with the women of the town. The festivities continued like this all the way down the Nile to Bubastis. There the people celebrated with a feast and sacrifices to Bastet. More wine was drunk during this festival than during the whole rest of the year. The Hebrew prophet Ezekiel lived in the 6th century BC when the worship of Bastet and her festival was at their most popular. In the Bible, Ezekiel mentions Bubastis, which he calls Pi Baseth. In chapter 30, verse 17 of the book Ezekiel in the Bible, it says, "The young men of Aven and Pi Baseth shall fall by the sword, and all these cities shall go into captivity." Ezekiel believed that Basset's followers would be captured because they worshipped the pagan gods. In the 6th century BC, the Egyptians were indeed captured. According to this legend, animal worship was one of the reasons for their downfall. Here's a picture of the festival. So we can see the women are playing instruments. They're sailing on the boats down the Nile to go to the temple. Chapter 5: Persian Conquest. When Cyrus the Great became king of Persia around 558 BC, he wanted to conquer the ancient empires and create one great empire. He was almost successful. When he died in 529 BC, his armies had conquered Media, Lydia, Babylon, and other empires, but he had not conquered Egypt. Cyrus' son Cambyses was the successor to the throne. Cambyses wanted to pursue his father's dream of conquering Egypt. After all, the Nile Valley was wealthy and powerful. It would be an important addition to the Persian Empire. Cambyses set out to conquer Egypt in 525 BC. Cambyses faced one big obstacle. His army was on the eastern border of Egypt, and the Egyptian army outpost at Pelusium was 56 miles away, and every one of those miles was across the desert. There were no towns, and more important, no sources of water. How could Cambyses lead his army safely to Pelusium? Luck was with Cambyses. While he was wondering how to get through the desert, the pharaohs Amamis had an argument with Phanes, a mercenary working for the Egyptian army. Phanes had decided to switch sides. He went to Cambyses and revealed important Egyptian military secrets, and he told him how to cross the desert. On Phanes' advice, Cambyses asked for help from the Bedouins, nomadic Arabs of the desert. The Arabs stationed camels across the desert between the Persian army and Pelusium. The camels carried skins filled with water, enough for the Persian army to cross the desert safely. In the meantime, the pharaoh Amamis died. His son Psammeticus III became pharaoh. The new pharaoh camped with his army at Pelusium to wait for the arrival of the Persians. The battle was fierce. Both sides knew they had a lot to lose. If the Egyptians were defeated, they would have to live under the rule of the Persians. If the Persians were defeated, they could not retreat through the desert. They would be captured or killed. But Cambyses had a plan. He knew about the Egyptians' devotion to their sacred animals, and he decided to use that against them. His army collected all the cats they could find. Then they released them, along with the dogs, ibises, and other sacred animals at the front of their lines. The Egyptians were paralyzed. They could not use their weapons against the Persians because they might kill or injure a cat instead. The army fled from the field, and Cambyses took Pelusium. Cambyses then conquered the rest of Egypt, thus fulfilling his father's dream. The Persian Empire was the greatest empire that had yet been built. It lasted about 200 years until Alexander the Great conquered it and the Ptolemies began their rule over Egypt. Chapter 6. Death of a Religion. Cambyses wasn't the only one who didn't respect ancient Egyptians' religion. Many Roman writers made fun of animal worship they saw in Egypt. Juvenal, who was born in the 1st century AD, wrote, "What won't these mad Egyptians use for gods? One district worships the green crocodile, another ibises gorged full on snakes, and in another, apes are still the style. Here cats, their river fish, are thought divine. Dogs, too." By the 2nd century AD, Christianity was becoming more and more widespread. Clement of Alexandria was a Christian theologian and educator. He described the beauty of the Egyptian temples. The halls are surrounded with many pillars, and the walls gleam with foreign stones, and there is no want of artistic painting, and the temples gleam with gold and silver and amber, and glitter with party-colored gems from India and Ethiopia. And the shrines are veiled with gold-embroidered hangings, but what he found inside did not impress him. When a priest pulls back the veil to show the visitor the god of the temple, Clement wrote, he will give you a hearty laugh at the object of worship. For the deity that is sought, to whom you have rushed, will not be found within, but a cat, or a crocodile, or a serpent of the country, or some other beast unworthy of the temple, but quite worthy of a den or hole or the dirt. The god of Egyptians appears a beast rolling out on a purple couch. Over the next few centuries, Christianity rose, and the ancient Egyptian gods were worshipped less and less. The temples of the gods crumbled. Then in the 7th century AD, Arabs conquered Egypt, and their new religion, Islam, became the main religion of the Egyptian people. Cats were no longer held sacred. The ancient cat mummies, so carefully preserved, so respectfully buried, lay at rest for more than 1,000 years. The resurrection of the cat mummies near Ben Hassan on the summer day of 1888 was probably not what the ancient Egyptians had expected. Unfortunately, no archaeologist was there that day to make scientific observations, but an eyewitness reported that the laborers from the nearby village excavated the cat cemetery themselves. They found hundreds and thousands of cat mummies buried in pits. Each pit contained 20 layers of cat mummies. Now, for the first time in more than 2,000 years, they were exposed to the light of day. Some of the mummies were in poor shape. They were simply black lumps with a few bones or clumps of fur, but many of the mummies looked as if they had been buried yesterday. Some were wrapped in beautiful two-color woven strips of linen. Some had faces covered with a thin layer of gold. Children from the village came to the site every day. They dug up the best mummies they could find. These they took down to the bank of the Nile, where they sold them to tourists passing by. Sometimes the children played with the mummies on the way to the river bank, or sometimes the children fought with each other and used the mummies as weapons, which made the mummies fall apart. Skulls and bones and pieces of fur and mummy cloth littered the path. But the sad story of the resurrection of these cat mummies doesn't end here. The scavengers barely made a dent in the huge cemetery. The rest of the mummies were shipped to Liverpool, England, to be auctioned off for fertilizer. The first load weighed 19 tons. It sold for £3 and 13 shillings and 9 pence per ton, or about $18 for a whole ton of cat mummies. The second shipment was sold 1 week later. This shipment contained almost 9 tons of cat mummy pieces. The bones were sold first for £5 and 17 shillings and 6 pence per ton, or about $29 per ton. These bones were also used as fertilizer. Cat mummy heads were sold separately, with price ranges from 42 cents to $1.09 each. One cat mummy body without the head was sold for less than $2. Here's a picture of them selling. It was a sad ending for these noble cats, once thought to be vessels of the gods. Unfortunately, many Egyptian antiquities met a sad fate in the 19th century. Around the beginning of that century, Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France, commissioned a huge study of Egypt and its ancient monuments. When this study was published a few years later, it triggered an interest in Egyptians' ancient wealth all across Europe. Tourists, amateur archaeologists, and natives ransacked ancient monuments for treasure to collect or sell. In this rush for gold, jewelry, and statues, many tombs and mummies were vandalized or destroyed. Napoleon's men also discovered the Rosetta Stone. Its inscriptions provided the key for deciphering hieroglyphics in 1822. The new ability to read hieroglyphics made scientists more interested in Egyptian archaeology. Now more and more could learn about life in ancient Egypt than ever before. Over the next few decades, a desire to preserve and learn from the ancient monuments slowly replaced the looting. After the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the Egyptian government began to limit the number of antiquities that foreigners could take out of the country. Eventually, everything excavated in Egypt became the property of the Egyptian government. Many cat mummies had been excavated in Egypt or rescued from looters, and they can be found in museums around the world. The species of cat that lived in ancient Egypt was so reverently mummified and buried, it is the ancestor of today's cat. Perhaps your cat is a descendant of one of these ancient sacred animals. The end.